Well, I'm just going to ask you right off the bat. How many of you are using cameras in your workplace? How many of you are reading your employees' emails? I can almost hear the answers from here. Carl, this is going to be good. They're going to enjoy this one. My name is Bandy Pridemore. This is Carl Ulrich, and you are watching or listening to The Human Resource. And today's topic is surveillance. It's Carl's topic. This was his idea.
Well, thank you.
Well,
Thanks for the credit. Not that we surveil our employees. I just thought it might be an interesting topic. So,
as an attorney with Sibley, Shillitoe, and Dyer, you've been approached by this.
Yeah, it comes up a lot. Employers want to know, hey, we've got expensive equipment, we've got computer systems, we've got a lot of, confidential and sensitive information stored on our hard drive servers. We want to protect that, and we want to make sure that our employees are, following the rules, are working when they say they're working, for example. But more than anything, to protect our investments in our property and our know-how. And sometimes employers want to monitor their employees' activities, and that can be done a lot of different ways, right? It can be done with a camera on a wall in some cases, but more frequently in computerized world, we see employers monitoring and inspecting laptop or desktop computers for emails, for downloading of information without authorization, for improper usage, for spending time on Facebook when they should be talking to customers, right?
That's where my clients are. They want to know who's watching porn, who's shopping,
exactly.
During work hours, and is she swimming when her little mouse is moving across the computer?
Right.
What is she doing?
And the technological options are really pretty remarkable these days. And I'm certainly no expert in the technology by any means, but you had a discussion the other day where you can actually monitor how the person's mouse is being used with special software to determine whether it's being moved enough during a particular time frame. The point being, if the person's on the computer doing what they say they're supposed to be doing, that the mouse is going to be moving in a way that it wouldn't be if they were off, mowing the lawn or something like that. So lots of different ways that employers can and do want to monitor their employees' behavior and conduct. And I would say sometimes for good reason, but a lot of times probably not for good reason.
Well, let's start from the top, because we're always, again, we try really, really hard to help the employers or our listeners to understand what the federal and state laws are that oversee these topics and how they can have a compliant workplace. Are we talking federal law? Are we talking state law?
Well, a little bit of both, but primarily we start with the old law called the common law, which talks about any individual has a reasonable expectation of privacy over private communications, and that doesn't necessarily mean just at home. It could be a reasonable expectation of privacy over communications, personal communications, even while they're in the workplace, right? That's the starting point for the law, and that's been that law's been around for years. The point being, what is a reasonable expectation of privacy? How reasonable is it for someone to expect to maintain privacy over personal communications when they're at the work site, sending emails back and forth to Amazon or to a friend about personal matters during work time? Is it reasonable for them to have an expectation of privacy over those communications and when they're using a company computer? Mm-hmm. The situation can get always more complicated, as we lawyers love to talk about. What if they're using their own computer and they're working home and, they're not necessarily monitored as closely as they would be if they were physically present in a central location. Is that different? And so what is a reasonable expectation of privacy? And outcomes vary from one jurisdiction to the next, and over time they have changed. But the point of reasonable expectation of privacy is to protect what is essentially and legitimately personal. Now, employers, if they provide a laptop or if they allow access to computer equipment in the workplace for work purposes, can say to the employee, we're going to monitor your computer activity. We're going to monitor your workstation. We're going to monitor what you are doing on a day-to-day basis. And by so saying, usually in writing, right, by policy, they are diminishing or undoing that expectation of privacy. I can't expect to be private if I know in my personal or in my employment handbook it says right there that the company is going to it deems all these things to be not private, and any use of our computer system was subject to inspection and review. So, if the employer takes the time to say that, to consistently remind employees of that, the employee then doesn't have that legal expectation of privacy that we talked about from the beginning. And that's how you start out. That's the starting point. Now, there are other rules, too, overlay of some federal rules involving interception of electronic communications. There are a number of federal statutes, but the primary rule is that expectation of privacy notion that I talked about.
Yeah, I know here in Ohio, the Ohio Revised Code requires employers, if they're going to have cameras, they have to post a sign saying that you're under surveillance. That's for internal and external customers alike. It's funny how we don't have to necessarily post anything for employees saying, "Oh, by the way, we're listening to your voicemail," and we're, But I have told clients before. I said, "How many times have you been on a phone call and you've heard this call is being recorded for training purposes?"
Sure.
They're making it very clear. And making sure God and country knows we're listening, we're looking. We're not going to tell you when or where, but there's a good chance that we're going to hear this conversation. Best practices for companies who are using surveillance.
Yeah, communicate early and often. I think there's no substitute for making your expectations clear in writing and verbally, usually starting with that onboarding process. We're giving you a computer. We're allowing you to use it in the workplace. We're allowing you to take it home, let's say. It's a laptop. You can carry it at home. We don't care if you store personal images on the computer. We don't care if while you're at home and you're using the computer for personal reasons, you go on Facebook. Just be aware that because this is company property and we're allowing you to use it occasionally for personal uses, be aware that we do have from time to time the right to inspect, and it's for legitimate business reasons, but anything you have on that computer might not necessarily be private. So that kind of communication, or you tailor the communication to whatever the circumstance is, but early and often. The other thing I really think is important is that if you do this by policy, which most companies now do, written communication by policy or in the onboarding process, you get something which the employee signs as an acknowledgement of receipt. And that acknowledgement usually says something like, I've read and understand the corporate surveillance and inspection policy. I acknowledge that it's my responsibility to ask questions about anything I don't understand. And they sign off on that, and they date it, which then becomes evidence in the event they later come back and say, well, you looked at my computer, and in the process of checking to see whether I had stolen any proprietary trade secrets, you also accessed my Facebook account. Or you saw those personal photos of me, which I didn't want to share. Yeah, it wasn't the purpose for the inspection, but it was inevitable that happened. So, again, those kinds of communications need to be clear up front, and I think sometimes we forget that.
I think for some people that would be a condition of employment.
Yeah, yeah.
Understand if you're going to be putting some very compromising pictures on your computer.
Yeah, I would say that that's probably bad judgment and maybe a larger concern, but it's odd how that happens. Now in my own office we have about 65 employees. We've got all professionals in our office. We're very flexible about how we use computer equipment. We have a lot of people who work part-time at home, part-time in the office, so they'll take their computer with them. And when we, as a matter of best practice for us, it was helpful for us to say to our people, look, we know you, we want to be flexible with you. We're giving you this computer for work, but it's okay if you use it for personal purposes. We want you to be proficient. We want you to use the computer for whatever. Now, there's an element of trust in that, right? We're making a decision to trust our people that they're going to use the computers in the right way. But they also know that there are times when, and we deal with confidential information from clients every day, and that information is sometimes stored on our computers. And oftentimes we need to access that even when the user of that computer isn't available. Now, we have centralized servers. We have a fairly sophisticated system. But we have made the judgment that, we don't mind if folks use the system, or the computer equipment for personal reasons. We just want them to be professional about that. And that doesn't mean, doing it in an inappropriate way in the workplace. Obviously, that's a different issue. But we do allow some flexibility, and that's a judgment call for every employer, really.
Well, and I'm really thrilled that you reminded companies we cannot restrict computers or stuff for only business. They took that. They took that, I don't know, restriction. I guess they took that away from us. That we have to give the employees some sort of reasonable ability to use it for personal use, just in case they want to contact a union. I mean, or report a safety issue. We aren't allowed to do that. But at the same time, I think that they should be, told ahead of time that you have to bring your personal in to be scrubbed if you're leaving the company.
Well, and that's the next question, right? What happens when somebody leaves the company? They have personal information as well as business information on a company-supplied laptop, or even more complicated, on a personal laptop that we've allowed them to use for business reasons.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
They're taking that laptop with them because they own it, right? If it's a company laptop, they're giving it back to the company. That's less of an issue. But let's say it's their own laptop. Do we have a right to go in and scrub it, take our stuff off of it? Again, yes, subject to, that's more complicated, and it's oftentimes more difficult to enforce because, again, person leaves, they're taking their laptop with them, it's their company, it's their personal property. Mm-hmm. They would expect to take that along. What they don't always realize is that they may have digital files with proprietary trade secret information that companies are very concerned about. Again, how do you navigate that? Again, early, often communication. You want to make it clear, all right, as a condition of us allowing you to use your personal computer for business reasons and for business purposes, we may limit what you can store in that computer. We may limit how you can use it for business reasons. But if you do leave the company, we will have, and you sign off on this, have a right to inspect that hard drive to make sure that everything that belongs to us is removed. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is really a minimum requirement if you're going to allow people to use their own computer equipment for business. You should be prepared to make that clear as a condition of that usage.
In the time that we've got left, let's go back to the cameras, because I've got a number of clients that have their facilities surveillanced for multiple reasons. But when you go into the office setting, you really have to be careful about where you're positioning those cameras. Mm-hmm. So let's just give them a reminder of what to think about when they're positioning those cameras.
So, I start with the simple rules, not very simple, but reasonable expectation of privacy. You don't put cameras up in a bathroom,
right?
In a changing area. You don't probably put cameras up in a private space. Now, if it's a workspace, it's theoretically okay. If it's a common area, a waiting room, a parking lot, something along those lines, I think that's certainly okay. But the real question is, what about areas which are a little bit of both? What about a lunchroom? And the other question is, it may depend upon whether you've got a represented workforce or a non-union workforce. In a non-union context, you have a little more flexibility in this case, subject only to that expectation of privacy we talked about. But there may also be other situations where there's a represented workforce where a union is recognized and representing the employees. Surveillance is more complicated in those situations, in part because you have a bargaining obligation under the National Labor Relations Act. So anything that affects the terms and conditions of employment, which could in some cases involve surveillance or include a surveillance, you may have to be prepared to talk to the employee representatives about that. Again, it just depends on the circumstances, but camera surveillance is reasonably common. And again, I think to your point that you made earlier, it's always good to make it clear to a passersby that there is video surveillance, right? And that's employees as well as visitors. You're entering a space where there's video surveillance.
Yeah, I had one client that was a little obsessive with his cameras. He's no longer, but he had him literally in the offices looking at the employee at his desk. And I was like, couldn't we just put it out in the hallway and get an idea of that he's in and out? Do we really need to be looking at every time he opens up a drawer? Mm-hmm. And you also want to be very careful, listeners. You don't want to just put the surveillance on nothing but the women, or you don't want to put it on just a certain class that could look like you're creepy. Mm-hmm. I'll just say it, that you're being creepy. Yeah. I also want to remind everyone, be careful about who has access to those cameras. It should be very limited. But I don't know about the how long you're supposed to keep them. Do you remember?
I don't know that there's a particular rule about keeping, and I think in many cases the video tapes, the video digital files or whatever they are, will get overwritten on a regular basis anyway. So, but I'm not aware of any specific rule for retention of those things.
Okay.
Now you may be in a different situation if, for example, you are an employer involved in litigation and you get hit with a lawsuit involving an employee who also happened to be in surveillance, subject of a surveillance camera. Those video files may become evidence, and you may receive what's called a litigation hold notice. So you'll have to make sure that any video files that are available at the time of that litigation hold notice are preserved.
Good point.
Not overwritten, because if they are overwritten, that is spoliation of evidence and potentially a problem independent of the lawsuit, right? So you want to put everything on hold. So there's a real management issue that comes with how you preserve information as a practical matter in the event of litigation.
I've told them a million times, anything can be subpoenaed. Mm-hmm. Your text messages, your voicemail, your emails. And now I totally forgot about the surveillance tapes. Yeah. Absolutely. Any last words on the topic of surveillance?
I think the question every employer needs to answer is, why are you doing it?
Good.
Why are you doing it? Am I doing it just because I want to have cameras up and I want to watch my folks, because I'm bored?
And I'm creepy?
You never do that, right? You never do that. Am I doing it because I have a legitimate concern about work habits, about property theft, about preservation of legitimate company interests or information? Why are you doing it? If you can't come up with a good why, don't do it.
Start with the why, as Simon would say. Good old Simon Semenuk. Well, that was a good topic. That was good because we haven't talked about that in quite a while. Carl, thank you. Thank you so much for coming in. And thank you for listening or watching. We're here for you. Send us your comments. Send us your recommendations. We want to thank and welcome all the new viewers that are coming in and sending us comments. We are here for you. We'll see you next week. Take care.